Well, hello. Welcome to our webinar today, Designing Services for a Post-COVID World. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see so many of you that have joined today and from so many different companies as well. It's fantastic to have you with us. We are going to be sharing a number of things with you today, but first of all, we'll just give a quick overview of the platform that we're on. So we're using Big Marker today, and you can see just to the right of your window, you should have a little chat panel open. If you want to say hello in there, do please introduce yourself, where you're from. And you've also got in there a section for Q&A. So if you pop onto that tab, if you want to ask a question at any point, you can pop it in there. And there's also the facility to be able to upvote. So if somebody's asked a question that you'd also like to hear the answer to, you can go in there and upvote, and we'll have a look at those in our Q&A session at the end of the webinar today. Quick introduction to myself. Hello, so my name is Amy. I'm head of consultancy at Bunnyfoot. I've been with Bunnyfoot since 2015, so I look after the team across all of our different locations. These are just a selection of some of my recent clients that I've worked with, very much still hands-on in terms of delivery of projects. So whether that is short strategic pieces looking at a particular research across a particular channel, or whether it's a much bigger strategic service design transformation piece, working across all of those. I've also written and teach our Fundamentals of Service Design course, which we will also talk a bit more about later. Hand over to Mila.
Oops. Yes, good afternoon. It's 1:30. So my name is Mila, and I'm also one of the principal consultants at Bunnyfoot. I'm also the person who is behind the service design course. So both me and Amy teach the course and work on different service design projects here at Bunnyfoot. And a few of the clients that I worked with, and most importantly, I'm also a sustainability officer at Bunnyfoot, which makes me slightly different to just being a consultant and working on different service design projects. I want also very briefly to remind you who we are. So we've been here for a while, 23 years and still counting. I'm talking about Bunnyfoot. And we're a team of different specialists, consultants, practitioners, designers, service designers, researchers, big thinkers. And we're based both in London and Sheffield. And some of the services that we provide are strategy, the design, research, testing, usability, training, and as well as service design, which we already mentioned. And we are not the only ones working there. We are part of a sideshow group, and these are the different agencies that are part of our group and with whom we collaborate. And without further ado, let's quickly review what we are going to tackle today and talk about and discuss. So we look at how different service design methodologies can help us to deliver an evolving combination of online and offline services effectively. We're in post-pandemic world, so it is very important to know what tools could help us, how we can evaluate complex ecosystems to make sure that we create value not only for the business, but also for our users. And we'll give you a review of different digital tools to support us in this service design process that we're in. And to set up the context of in which world we're living in now and working in now, I'll hand off to Amy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mila. I can see a few of you have asked in the chat about recordings for today. So you will be able to get hold of a recording after the session. If you email Jo Hutton, she'll get in contact with you about that. We won't send out the slide deck afterwards, but yeah, you will be able to get a recording. So do reach out to Jo if you'd like to do that. Okay, well, I want to take you back in time for a moment to March 2020, which is probably a time that many of us have tried to forget about as much as possible, because it was a time when we saw one of the biggest challenges to our country and our world that we faced really in recent history. And over the 2 years that followed that, the effects of COVID-19 were felt globally. We had lockdowns, we had restrictions, social distancing, And almost every aspect of modern life really was affected by the pandemic in some way. We had school closures, didn't we? We had office closures, we had all sorts of public spaces that shut down. And I think for many people, they were spending more time than ever before at home. So we had scenes like this that became quite commonplace, socially distanced queues going into supermarkets, and sort of entry systems and masks. All of that became quite common sights that we saw. And we found that service providers were having to really implement really rapid change to keep people safe. So we had things like service providers having to pivot to make sure that their services and experiences that they were providing in person previously, that they could suddenly provide them digitally, from restaurants like Pizza Pilgrims, who they couldn't serve anybody in person anymore. So they looked at creating some pizza making kits that they could send out to people at their homes, through to medical appointments. Suddenly medical appointments became online, video calls. I had a baby in 2020, and health visitor visits, they couldn't come to your house, so they had to be video calls, which was quite strange. Physio appointments became video calls. Again, a little bit strange, trying to sort of show range of motion in a joint over a video call and make sure they could understand what you were saying. Baby groups became Zoom groups because face-to-face contact had to be so limited and so restricted, didn't it? And oh, my computer's frozen. There we go. And I think what we saw during the pandemic was that touch points had to become touchless. So in service design, we talk about touch points, the points at which users interact with services or service providers in some way. And we also talk about the transitions between those touch points as well. But all of a sudden, kind of overnight, really, back at that point, the way that services were provided suddenly had to change really quickly. And for many of those businesses, it wasn't about, giving them something to do during lockdown. They weren't sat there twiddling their thumbs going, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could start providing online escape rooms or sending out meal kits? These pivots were really vital to their survival. And you think back, Debenhams, Arcadia Group, Mothercare, those were just some of the thousands of business casualties of COVID-19. And others survived. And as the lockdowns began to ease, we started to see sort of different levels of restrictions that were quite hard to keep up with at times, what you were allowed to do when and how many people you could see and all of that. And as those restrictions began to change again, a whole other layer of change ensued, with services becoming hybrid, physical locations often reopening, but often with a much reduced capacity. And so all of those different ways that services were provided again had to change to make sure that they were in line with restrictions. And now we're kind of in a stage where restrictions in the UK have eased pretty much totally. And yet many of the changes that took place during that time, during the pandemic, have actually remained in place. And many of the ways of life that we've adapted to over the last couple of years have become quite commonplace. We've kind of got used to them. And that's because not all change is bad, of course. Some things have been really positive changes, and actually many of the service providers have found real value in some of the changes that they implemented during the pandemic. It might be that they found additional income streams, or new market reach, or new marketing opportunities, and they found different people to get their products out to, get their services out to. But I think the stage that we're at now is, and this is what we want to talk about today really, is that it's a moment in this post-COVID world. It's a great time to take stock of where we're at as service providers and to understand the value of the often, if we're honest, hastily implemented changes that happened over the last few years, and to ask some questions and to think about what we want to keep, what we want to iterate on, and what we need to stop doing and remove completely. And the methodologies of service design provide us with a really great framework to explore some of these questions, to examine where you're at currently as an organisation, and to think about where you want to get to in the future. And of course, we need to, as we're thinking through these questions today and as we go forward, we need to think with the ever-changing backdrop in mind. It's not like COVID has happened, it's ended, and the world has stood still. We are facing war in Ukraine. We're facing cost of living crisis. energy price increases, government instability, to name a few things. And all of that is constantly kind of changing in the background. So we need to have an awareness of that as we're thinking through these different things today, because that has a massive impact on the expectations and the needs of the people that we're providing services to, but also the environment that we're operating in as service providers. So a few of the things that we're going to be thinking about today. And what we need to do is to think about how we can zoom out. So often when service decisions are made rapidly, they're made with the kind of the immediate impact in mind, and the focus becomes very, very zoomed in, very, very focused onto a particular interaction or a particular problem. But service design is about kind of doing the opposite of that. It's about zooming out, sort of lifting your gaze a bit and thinking about how all these different interactions fit together and how the overall experience of a service provision looks from lots of different perspectives. So we're going to talk through a bit of an example about how you can lift your eyes, how you can start to zoom out, and what that looks like. So let's take an example. First of all, this most kind of zoomed in level that we can operate at is called usability. So this is where we're thinking about a particular interaction. It's everything concerned with during use. So to give you an example of that, if we think about a broadband company, we might be thinking, okay, we're a broadband provider. We're asking the question, can a London commuter use our website to purchase broadband for their home? They're using an iPhone and they're on the train. So we're thinking about that very particular user, specified context of use, specified goal that they're trying to achieve. And the three questions that we're asking when we're thinking at this kind of level of zoom is we're saying effectiveness, can they actually do what they've set out to do? Efficiency, how quickly can they do what they're trying to do? And satisfaction, how do they feel about that experience? But if we zoom out a level from here and we start to think about before use and after use, in addition to during use, what we're talking about there is user experience. So to go back to our example of the broadband company, we'd be looking at what somebody's expectations are about the company, the website, the process that they're about to go through of purchasing the broadband, the actual process of doing that, and then also thinking about how well their experience matches up to their expectations before they went through that process. And actually, if you zoom out another step further, there are these kinds of experiences happening multiple times across multiple different touch points throughout a service journey. So it could be the purchase of the broadband via the website, it could be a call to customer services, or the actual delivery and installation process to get set up with the broadband. And in an organisation at any one time, you have likely got different teams who are working on these different experiences and many more, often separately to each other. And you're not necessarily zooming out again to think at a higher level. But if we do that and we have a look at a sort of a higher level and we're exploring not only these individual experiences, but also the transitions between them, and also everything that's going on behind the scenes in order to deliver those services, what we're talking about there is actually service design. So service design is taking a broad look across, but it's also taking a deep look down at what's happening behind the scenes. But going back to our pandemic situation for the moment, I think what happened during the pandemic was that parts of service provision needed to change so quickly that the focus, as I say, zoomed right into this usability level without much consideration, or in some cases any consideration, of how that fitted into the broader service journey. So again, taking this example with the broadband, a big part of what needed to change during COVID was how delivery was done and how installation was done, right? So think back to those days where you had socially distanced deliveries. You had to notify the company if you were self-isolating, and they'd ring on your doorbell and leave it and step back however many meters and take a photo. All of that needed to have a way of being facilitated. But also installation. There were significant chunks of time where you couldn't have somebody come into your home to help you with an installation process. So companies needed to think about how they could support people to self-serve at that part of the journey. So whether that was a video call, or providing some sort of printed instructions, or maybe a QR code that they could scan so they could see some little instruction videos to help guide them through that process. So we need to kind of get to a stage where we're thinking, right, this was what happened because it had to happen so quickly. We had to make these quick changes. But now we want to kind of think, right, let's evaluate what we've got. Let's evaluate what we've done. Let's step back. Let's lift our eyes. Let's zoom out a bit and start to think more broadly. We found this image, which we thought was quite true. Who led the digital transformation of your company? Was it your CEO, your CTO, or was it COVID-19? I think probably for many of us here today, we would pick option C, perhaps. But what we want to do now is to start thinking, as I say, start lifting our eyes, start zooming out, and start thinking about how we can move forward from the place that we're in at the moment. And service design has got a range of tools and techniques that can help us with this kind of thinking. And we're going to take you through a few of them today. And I'm going to hand over to Mila now, who's going to take us through the first ones.
Oops. So yes, thank you, Amy, for setting up the scene, I would say, and reminding us everything we went through. But speaking of different methodologies and how service design can help. So just a reminder that it all starts with the research, and research underpins service design. So you can't make changes successfully without understanding the current state. And the best place to start is to map out your current service provision, everything you know about it. You get together with your stakeholders across different teams, explore what you know, what you don't know, identify the gaps, identify where research is needed. And potentially you can come and use different mapping methods to map out what you know, what you don't know. Or if, for example, you've done the research already, you can map out all your findings. And the tools that are considered to be the best ones there in terms of mapping out and giving the overview, holistic overview, a good visualization of the complex services that we're working in are these ones. It's the customer journey map, service blueprint, value proposition map, and stakeholder maps with all its variations. These are the essential tools to help us work with complex services, especially when we have to do offline, online interactions. And I believe you know some of those. Maybe you have tried yourself, you've experienced, you read about them. And we are going to talk today about different ways how you can modify these tools, how you can alter them to meet your needs, to meet your services, to meet all these complexities that we are living now. And the first one is the experience mapping, or also very much known as customer journey mapping. It's a great tool to visualize the service provision from the perspective of a customer or your user. And it's a great way to document the thoughts, the questions, the perceptions, the emotions of your persona, the pain points, the highlights, the drops, everything. As mentioned earlier, you can do it prior to the research to get all the assumptions, or after the research when you map out based on the knowledge that you've collected, the data that you've collected. It's a great way to understand mismatches between the customer expectations and the reality of what is happening. And there's many ways how you can do the journey mapping. There's many templates, many tools, and nothing is set in stone. You can experiment. There's a few examples from low cost to something more digital. We want to highlight that the screenshot in the middle, this is the output from Experience Fellow app. Actually, it stopped. It was closed in 2021. Some assumptions maybe due to the pandemic roller coaster, but the guys who developed that tool actually continue their journey, and they now have another tool called Smaply, which we're going to introduce later on today in our section covering all the new digital tools that you can use. But this is just an illustration of how journey mapping or experience mapping could look like. And you can see, you can do sketches, you can put images. You can add location maps, notes, even video clips to kind of illustrate everything what is happening. You have different swim lanes, and you can also add. You can follow like the basic ones, like what is happening, the emotions, the actions, the steps, but then also you can alter and add things that are relevant to your service and your particular needs. The other tool, probably my favorite one, I must confess, is the service blueprint. This is this super holistic approach of mapping up all the components and existing players in the service, easily, in a very kind of straightforward and simply to understand way. The service blueprint is a great communication tool as well, not only the actual research tool or the actual like mapping tool. It helps to show the connections between different departments, on stage, off stage processes, employees, customers. It's kind of the step further after the user journey map, because the service blueprint goes deeper, goes below the surface of the user. And when we are building our service blueprints, there are two ways we can use it. We can follow on the current state and identify all the problems, breakdowns, pain points in the current service provision, and going really into the depth of what is happening across different touch points. But then, once we understood the current state, and once we've conducted the research to fill up all the gaps, identified potential challenges, or also opportunities for improvement, we can move into looking into future state. This is where we lay out the horizon, the future horizon of what our service could look like. It helps us to coordinate and plan further steps in the project. It's kind of also operational prototyping tool in a way, when you holistically show what could happen to our service if we implement certain changes. And these are the key components of a service blueprint. As I said, it's the step further from user journey, because basically the start of the service blueprint is the actions, the customer actions and the phases and the physical artifacts, the things that the customer interacts with, customer or user. And then we have next level, which is the on-stage interactions, staff level. So what is happening? What things? What actions do staff do? What actions staff take in order to help our customers to achieve what they're trying to? But then there is another level of off-stage interactions. Basically, what is happening behind the scenes? All those beautiful things that we do, for example, with marketing department, or I don't know, digital support teams, everything they do to make our work happen and take place. So everything which customer doesn't see but which needs to take place. And the last but not least is all the support processes, the technologies, the protocols, the mechanisms that help service take place and happen. There are different lines in service blueprint. The line of interaction, this is the line between the customer and the employees, the ones who interact directly with the customer. There is a line of visibility, so everything which customer can see and what they can't see go below that line. And the line of internal interaction, so this is who interacts with different support systems and processes. To illustrate the service blueprint is even better, we found this beautiful visualization, and we should give credit. So this image is from, I'll try to pronounce it in the right way, it's German words, Die Krieger. It shows like physical interpretation of the service blueprint using the example of a cafe. So you can see in the front portion, you've got a customer journey. So basically, it's the people sitting in the cafe having their drinks and food. They cross over the line of the interaction when they need some help. So they go to the staff to place their order, for example. And then there is a line of visibility which hides the kitchen, the backstage, everything which is happening there. It's something like in the theater, you have the curtains, and there's so much happening behind the curtains to make sure that the beautiful play that we are watching is possible for us to see. So, and yes, so that backstage stuff, they go around, prepare the meal, and for that to happen, they need to cross another line of internal interaction, because they need to make sure that there are the right processes set up. The processes, for example, with the logistics, bringing food to the cafe so that they have something with what they can cook. So basically, as you can see, all these lines in this simple example of, like, for one service provision, like visiting a cafe or having food in a cafe, how many things are happening, how many lines, how many stages, how many teams are involved. And it's a great way to illustrate human to human, but also human to non-human or human to technology interactions. And there are many examples, as similarly to the customer or user journey mapping. There is no template, nothing is set in stone. You can twist it, it's a very flexible tool, so you can adjust it to your needs. And I want to give you a few examples of how you can do service blueprints. So for example, Philips service blueprint, they've incorporated storyboard. So it doesn't need to be just post-its and black and white. You can do cartoon style with like storyboarding instead of just the description of the actions what customer is going through. This is a service blueprint, aka pandemic upgrade of the service blueprint. So this is a blueprint with a little alteration. It's been developed by the innovation team at the University Hospitals of Cleveland. And, you know, as Amy said, during the pandemic, there's so many things that we had to change. So the whole customer journey of, for example, visiting a hospital became very touchless. As much as possible touchless. Everything became touchless. But obviously with the hospital, it was even double trouble to make sure that things were working okay. And the team working behind, like, reintroducing this user journey of being in a hospital, realized that the current blueprint was not enough, that something was really missing. And they've introduced additional line, which is this line. This is the back of the backstage, and they call it the line of orchestration. So basically what it means, for when things were happening rapidly, when so many changes needed to take place, the senior leadership, the decision makers, the ones who could break or make the service or break the service, were so crucial. And the team thought, like, they can't separate the staff. They need to bring in that additional layer of management and make sure that they have their action for everything which customer is going through. There needs to be managerial actions and approvals. So they need to be like an active part of the process. And they felt like it's vital not to separate that managers and their actions from the rest of the blueprint. So it's kind of an interesting way of bringing in additional layer and seeing, like, what are the actions from the management had to take place. Another example is, we called it Service Blueprint XXL. Please don't get overwhelmed. It's just to illustrate that you can modify blueprints. It doesn't need to be just only 6 lines. It could be more. This is an example of bringing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional layers to the blueprint. The guys here felt like it's not enough just to show what is happening behind the scenes, what's happening with the customer and which services and which systems are in place. They also needed further steps. They decided to bring the levels, the additional lines of solutions, requirements, staff actions, impact measurements, and even MVPs. So basically, this is an illustration that you can do whatever you want. If something is needed, you can introduce an additional line. But please don't feel overwhelmed and pressed that need to come up with something as complex. You can start simpler, you can build up on it, you can alternate. It's a living document, service blueprint. It's not like once you've done it and that's it. You have to do, especially when we live in the world like now with such a vulnerable world with so many volatilities. So if something big happens, you need to go back to your blueprint, do a round of research to make sure that it's still up to date. And yes, later on, we'll also cover a few digital tools that could help you build up the blueprints like this much easier. And I'll hand over to Amy now. Brilliant. To give an example.
Yeah, so before we go on and show you some of the other tools that we wanted to talk about today, we just wanted to apply some of this thinking to an example. So let's spend a few minutes just having a think about a museum visit and just thinking about some of the ways that that experience has changed over the last few years. So on the screen at the moment, you can see a part of a service blueprint for a museum visit pre-pandemic. And you can see on here all the different actions that the customer is taking, as well as all the different interactions, as Mila's just talked through, that they'd be having with the different staff, be they on stage or off stage. And then obviously all the different conversations, the different interactions that are happening behind the line of visibility, behind the scenes, to actually make sure that a service is being provided in the best possible way. So that's just a portion of that diagram. Obviously it would go on through that whole journey to follow the whole thing. And obviously pre-pandemic, the focus of museum visits was really a visit to a physical location. So people were looking to go to a museum and interact with the exhibits there in different ways, be that a digital visitor guide or some sort of augmented reality or other exhibits that you could dance in front of or whatever it was that you wanted to do. And that all formed part of that experience. But then obviously when COVID hit, suddenly museums had to close their physical spaces and they had to think again creatively about some way that they could give people access to the museum virtually. So whether that was viewing collections online, different learning materials, some created sort of virtual reality tours or whole environments like this Museum of the World piece that you can see in the middle here, where you could go and explore kind of on different dimensions of time and different tags of types of artifacts that you might look at. People did podcasts, there were online talks, all sorts of things like that. Me and my husband actually did a date night. There wasn't much else to do, you couldn't go out anywhere, so we made some nice food and we did a virtual museum visit and we did some tours of galleries and museums around Europe, and we used Google Arts and Culture that you can see on the right there to do that. So that was an interesting evening. It's a bit of a different thing to do. And then obviously restrictions again started to change. So suddenly museums could start to reopen at certain points, and there was all of the restrictions of limited capacity and things that they needed to think about, and social distancing. And so obviously to manage that, they had to put some things in place again, and some changes that had to be implemented. And one of those things that lots of places did was to implement a free ticketing system. So they could limit the number of people coming in, but also so that they could track who was coming in for the track and trace program. But actually, a lot of places have kept these free ticketing systems in place, even though they're not necessarily needed anymore. The restrictions have lifted. We don't have capacity limits on locations anymore, but they've kept their free ticketing systems. Me and my husband and my son went to the Science Museum actually a few weeks ago, and I hadn't realised that you still needed to book a free ticket. So I was sat outside on my phone booking the tickets for 10 minutes time so that we could go in and then scan the code, and we made it through. But it's interesting to think about why some of those changes haven't happened and have stayed in place. And actually it's because organisations have found that there's been some real value for them in the free ticketing system, because suddenly they've got this whole other stream of data on their visitors that they can use to send targeted marketing messages. They can use it to push for donations, and they can track all their visitor numbers. They can track types of visitors that are coming into their locations and build this better picture of who their visitors are. Now, obviously, during COVID, there was some real value that was provided from that free ticketing system for visitors as well. Obviously, aside from access to the museum and knowing that they weren't going to travel there and make all the effort, have to queue up and not be sure if they'd get in or not. It also gave them some reassurance that it was going to be a safe visit, that there would be a limited capacity, that they could feel confident that they would be okay and that they wouldn't be kind of encountering too many people, and that the organisation was following the restrictions in place. But now that we're post-COVID, the value of that free ticketing system for visitors needs to be considered afresh, because visitor numbers, as I say, they don't need to be limited anymore. So what is the value? What is the need of that system from a visitor's perspective? It's obviously still providing a lot of that same value to the service provider, but for the service user, is it doing the same kind of things that it was? So that takes us back to this question, really, of what do we need to keep? What do we need to iterate on? And what do we need to remove following the changes that were made during the pandemic? And really, it's about us exploring the value of those things for all the different parties involved. Because to create value for your business, you need to be creating value for your customers, your end users. But to sustainably create value for your customer, you need to obviously be creating value for your business. So it's this whole kind of big circular picture, really. And that's why it's so important that we consider all the different stakeholders when we design services. But also, we need to think about how value changes over time, because customer and business needs change. And so therefore, the value of service propositions isn't going to be a static thing either. We need to think about, is it still aligned with what our end users are looking for? And do we need to change the way that we're communicating about our value proposition, about what we're delivering, to make sure that those things are aligned? And that whole idea of the co-creation of value between businesses and their users is something that's picked up on in these two helpful books. So you may have come across them. So Business Model Generation and Value Proposition Design. These are both by Strategizer. I really recommend you have a look at them if you've not done so already. And one of the techniques that they talk about in these books is value proposition mapping. So this is a method that allows you to really describe your value proposition as an organisation and to describe your target customer in a bit more detail. And then it helps you to kind of evaluate what the fit is between those two things, between the value that you're intending to create and the expectations that your customers have got, and to see how kind of aligned those things are. And this tool is one, as with many of the tools that we're talking about today, that can be used kind of before you've done your research and before you've got that in-depth knowledge of who your customers are. If you do use it in that way, then obviously you're going to capture your assumptions. You're going to capture some research hypotheses that you can go out and test. And you can also think about kind of ideas that you've got for your value proposition that you then want to go and test with your end users. If you've already done your research and you're using it kind of after that to help you analyse, then really it's going to be helping you evaluate what that fit is between what you're selling, your proposition, what you're offering, and between your customers. And you can obviously apply it to new value propositions. You can apply it to existing ones, and customer segments too. And in all cases, it's just going to really help you to structure your thinking around those things and make your ideas a bit more tangible, because we can all have this stuff that's going on in our organisations, but we're not necessarily thinking it through in a targeted way as we could be. And the big idea really behind using this kind of tool is to help you think about how you can prioritise certain elements, and also really how to communicate it to prospective customers as well. So I'm just going to take you through some of the different elements of this tool to hopefully help you think about how you might be able to apply it in your own situation. So on the kind of the circle side, this is the customer bit that we're talking about first of all. You essentially decide on which customer type you're going to focus on for this map. So you would make multiple of these for your different customer types. You describe what jobs that they are trying to do. And jobs are basically things they're trying to do in their work, trying to do in their life, tasks that they're trying to complete, essentially problems they're trying to solve, or needs that they need to satisfy. So think about, they may not just be functional things, it may be emotional things as well. And then you've got the pains section. So this is about anything that annoys your customers essentially before, during, or after they're trying to get something done in that job section, or even something that's like a blocker to them, stops them from getting that job done. And it also describes risks, potential bad outcomes, anything that would stop them from getting a job done or make it done badly. So you're kind of thinking here, what are their big concerns? What's keeping them awake at night? What kind of things do they fear? What barriers are keeping them from adopting a certain value proposition? So that's the pains part. And then we've also got the gains part. So that's a third part on the customer side. And that's really thinking about what outcomes do they want? What benefits do they want? Some of those things will be requirements. Some of them will be expectations, or some of them will be more sort of desirable things, or even surprises to them that they'd really like to see. And it could be functional things, but it could also be social gains as well. So it might be about things that about their status, things that make them look good, things that might be a relief to them, or things that they aspire to achieve. So it's not just all about cost savings, it's about that emotional, social aspect as well, because we all have those needs too. And then you move across to the square side of the diagram. So this is the value map portion. And this is where you start to fill in, first of all the different products and services that the value proposition is built around in this section here. And then you look at some pain relievers. So this is where you're essentially describing how exactly your products and your services are going to alleviate some of those customer pains that you've drawn out on the circle side. And they talk about how you're going to get rid of those annoyances that your customers are facing, or the things that are blockers to them, how you're going to remove those blockers. So they should directly answer the pains on the circular side of the diagram. And then finally on this side, you've got gain creators. So these are the things that describe how your products and services create the customer gains. So again, these need to be aligned with the gains that your customers are expecting and desiring. Otherwise, there's going to be a mismatch. But you talk about how you're going to make your customers' lives easier. You're going to talk about how you are going to help them to adopt the service provision and how you can help them achieve those social consequences that they were looking to achieve. So their status, making them feel good about what they're doing, all of those kinds of things. So when we think back to that example about the free ticketing situation, we need to think about how that fits and evaluate it from that perspective of the customer needs, the customer gains, the customer pains, the jobs that they're trying to do, and how that fits with what the organization is trying to do and how they're trying to meet those needs and make sure that they're aligned. And hopefully this is something that you can think about how you could apply it in your organization to some of the changes that were made rapidly over the last couple of years. But Mila is now going to take us through a few other tools that we can also use to look at some value exchange.
Thank you, Amy. So yes, speaking of value exchange, doing good for the customer, doing good for the business, we can't but not talk about the stakeholder maps. It's one of the amazing tools. There are many variations and modifications and mutations of this tool that we are going to cover. This is not a new tool. Service design is famous for borrowing the best tools from other fields. And this is a common business tool used for change management. And service design, it became like a great service design technique to visualize all the stakeholders involved in a certain experience, service, product, or system. It can be a particularly good tool at the start of the service design project because it gets you thinking who is involved, who is missing, whom we need to contact, who should be part of, for example, the project. But there are many other applications for this tool. Speaking of variations, so service design or stakeholder maps in service design have three options: the more traditional stakeholder map, value network map, and ecosystem map. And we are going to go through all of them and give you some examples and explanations of the differences. So, as if most familiar to everyone, I believe, the stakeholder map is like the classic. It includes usually people and organizations that take part in the service provision. And usually in the middle, you'll put your persona, you'll put your customer, you'll put your target audience, and then you'll allocate all the people and the companies that interact with that user. The ones who are more closely in terms of interacting based on the level of content would be closer to the center, and the ones who are interacting less with the user, for example, the customer, would be more on the outer side of the circle. And that's why we have the letters A, B, and C. So this is how you can prioritize based on the level of content or contact, or also it could be based on the level of influence. The ones who are more essentials would be in the center, and the ones who are interesting, for example, for the project or for the service, would be on the more to the outside. There are some variations of this particular type of map. One of those is people and connections map. It's essentially the same. However, here you have, it reminds more of like the spider map, where you have sections, but then you have the layers. So in this instance, the layers are stakeholders, local communities, national and international. So it's like this kind of more broader levels that you introduce, and you put all the players according to them. And then you also have sections, and you can allocate your players or your stakeholders in different sections, and you can name them. It could be sections related to health, section related to security, cybersecurity, for example, in the digital world, and especially in the post-pandemic world, it's very important, health and safety. There could be a section related to environment or science, or you name it, something which would be applicable for your project, for your service. The other type of map is the value network map. So what transforms a stakeholder map into a value network map is the introduction of the value exchanges between the different stakeholders. So these are some of the examples of what value exchange could be. It could be very straightforward monetary value, such as revenue, credit, sponsoring, subscription drives, etc. It could be the exchange of products, services, system, policies. It could be information exchange, for example, consumer data, content, knowledge, skills, or it could be something intangible, such as emotional value. For example, brand recognition, trust, attention. So, and usually when you create this map, so you will allocate all your stakeholders. So you have your stakeholder map, and then you do all the connections. Sometimes it's both ways, the connection, not just one way. And this is where you see where the problems are, where something is missing, where the connection is missing. Maybe there is a lost opportunity. Maybe you just need to introduce a different stakeholder, different partner to change that interaction. So it's a kind of great analysis tool to use when you're holistically looking at your stakeholder map, at your everyone who is involved in the project. And then we're taking another step forward and speaking of ecosystem map. So what is that? What transforms the value network map into ecosystem map? So here, as you can see, there is that orange addition at the bottom called IT backend system. So in the ecosystem map, it's not only humans and organizations, because usually behind the organization there are humans who are interacting with the user, the customer, or like each other. But in this case, in the ecosystem map, it goes a bit bigger. So we introduce systems and programs as stakeholders. And then we show how they interact, what the value exchange is, what is missing, what are the risks are, what are the danger zones. You can also illustrate changing the color, for example, of the value exchange, making it red and saying, oh, there's some tension and the problems there. And ecosystem maps are particularly relevant to the world we live in now, post-pandemic world, when there's so many complexities, so many players, and very often so many non-human players involved, such as AI or cloud services. Our world is too complex to be presented by a standard stakeholder map. So we need something bigger, more holistic. I want to give you a couple of examples. and ask you some questions. It's a pity we can't see your faces, otherwise we'll see thumbs up, thumbs down, what you think. So here is an example of ecosystem map. My question is, do you think it's an ecosystem map? Obviously, you can answer to yourself, but this is an example of a home buyer, of home purchase experience, and it is from Nielsen Norman Group. So the buyer in the middle is surrounded by many different people, organizations, service providers with whom the buyer might interact while purchasing a new home. So it is called ecosystem map, but I personally disagree with that. I think it's more stakeholder map, because we miss the value exchanges, and it's very linear. So it's just a home buyer, and that home buyer interacts with those different players. So we don't see all the value exchanges between them. Everything is kind of going just to one person in the middle. And also it's missing the systems. So I would personally call it a stakeholder map. Another example, would you consider this to be an ecosystem map? Example. Let me give you a little bit of a context to this one. So the purpose of this ecosystem map was to better understand the safety in informal settlements in Africa. So the researchers behind did a lot of research, talked to a lot of different stakeholders, and they wanted to understand who is involved in the prevention of fire happening very often in those informal settlements in Africa. So after doing research and mapping it out, it allowed them to identify like the key actors involved in emergency, and also the flow of information and communication that was happening between those actors, and potential gaps and interruptions that were part of what was happening, which was captured during the research. So it's creating the maps like this for different locales, for different places, different cities. I think that project was in like Cape Town and then in Nairobi, so different countries, helped also to compare how it was tackled or handled in different locations. So would you consider it as ecosystem map? So we have different players, we have different organizations, there is exchange of communications and information. I would say it's a partially ecosystem map, but more like value exchange map, because they're focusing only on information exchange. So it's not stakeholder. We see the value exchange happening between the parties, but it involves only human kind of stakeholders, the company's organization, but still humans interacting with the main customer who is dwelling in this case. So I would call it a value network map, not an ecosystem map. What about this one? I'll give you a few seconds to kind of make up your mind, have a look at it. Would you call this an ecosystem map example? A little bit of what is happening here. So this map shows a specific brand, in this case, the Red Bull brand, and its value exchanges with its subsidiary or sister companies. So we can see that Red Bull is not only a drink company, it's also actually a very sophisticated media company. And it uses revenue from their drinks to fund sports teams, to fund sports events, to fund athlete ambassadors. The ones in exchange, they provide the content, which then used to create a brand recognition by Red Bull Media Company. So is it an example of an ecosystem map? You will guess? It is actually an example of organizational ecosystem map of Red Bull. And why? Because it focuses on all those subsidiaries within the big brand. So we could have easily created something like this for Amazon or maybe Google. So you can imagine it's like the interconnectivity between all the different businesses, between the physical assets, between some intangible or more like media house, the companies that produce brand recognition. So there's a lot of value exchange. In this case, it's sponsoring, revenue, content creation, content exchange, and brand recognition. And the formula behind is this one, as I said, different assets, tangible, intangible assets within a big business organization, and how the value exchange is happening. So as service designers, we need to make something complex tangible. And this is a great tool to have a review, a great communication tool, but also a great tool to help and guide the processes and make the understanding of something super complex. If you think, oh, organizational ecosystem mapping is something new, absolutely not. Actually, it existed for a very long time, and this is a marvelous example of a Disney organizational ecosystem map. I know you can spend probably half an hour looking into it. I spent half an hour and I found it. I was like intrigued. I love it incredibly. It's a great, very difficult but mesmerizing organizational ecosystem map. And the funny bit is, it was created by the founder of Disney, Walt Disney, back in 1957. And apparently, the story, as we all know, these branded stories, that was a strategy that he's created on a napkin known as synergy map. And basically, it's very similar to what we've just seen earlier. It's like how different sides of the business, different parts of the business exchange value to each other. So it's not only monetary, it's like, content, information sharing, skills sharing, knowledge sharing. As we know, Disney is, for like 90 years, the company. So this approach proves to be working because they're still in business. They're still competing with all these streaming services these days. But it's kind of a perfect example how you can visualize something very complex and make sure that you're utilizing every aspect of your business, every stakeholder involved in your organization. There are some other types of ecosystem maps, we are not there yet, is business ecosystem map. So it is very similar to what we've already seen on organizational level, but this one takes it even one step further. So in this example, we allocate different players, different stakeholders into different zones. One is core value proposition, what Amy covered, when you kind of understand all the gains and pains and you bring the customer in. So this is the part where the business and the customer come together. So they would be the two leading players, or like two key, the core of the core of the value proposition, value exchange. Then there is another level of complementary offering, that another one of supplying and enabling network, and all the other stakeholders that might be part of. Let me give you an illustration. So when we are creating the map like business ecosystem map, that would be a different players that we will allocate to the map. And here's an example. I know you might feel overwhelmed looking at it, but it's pretty fascinating. So as I mentioned, in that core value proposition, once you've done that exercise that we introduced earlier, the tool, you can allocate and put it there. In this example, it's an Apple platform. So it's an Apple business ecosystem map and the Apple user. And you have different value exchanges happening here. So there is a legend, like goods and services, the green one, the green line, money and credits, the red, information, intangible value, the purple one. So you can see what is happening. There's so many players involved. There are even competitors involved. To give you a better illustration, once we put the logos in, so you can see all the interactions are happening and you can recognize the companies involved in this Apple business ecosystem map. So just, the players with the icons and the power of putting the logos. So yes, it's not just stakeholder map anymore. We live in the complex world and we need to have complex tool to make sure that we present everyone involved and show the interactions between different players. But don't worry, you don't need to create everything yourself. There is the era of different digital tools that can support you and the service design process. So I'm going briefly introduce several of them. Maybe you know some of them. Maybe some of them would be a surprise for you. First and foremost, the usual suspects. These are the different tools that help us to kind of the creative workspaces to help us to collaborate. And I know different companies have different preferences. We are working with Miro at Bunnyfoot and with our clients. Then there is this tool, Figma, which is very famous among the designers. It's a prototyping tool, but they also now moved into becoming like online whiteboard tools, something for collaboration similar to Miro or Mural. So that's something which probably you came across, or maybe it's new for you. Indemo is a great tool to conduct the research. So we've mentioned earlier, for example, when you want to build up the user journey and show the flow. So that's one of the tools for mobile ethnography, which then could be a great mapping tool as well. Another tool is called Smaply. So we referenced that earlier. This is the tool online where you can create multiple user journeys, multiple personas, stakeholder maps, ecosystem maps, network value exchange maps, and then they're all interconnected. So it could be one persona and use that persona for journey mapping or stakeholder mapping. So it's kind of very interactive and easy to use, and it kind of links all the research data in one place. Similar to Smaply, there is They Do tool. It's the tool that brings all customer journeys in one place, all personas in one place. It looks complex, but it's the tool that you can repurpose when you can bring different assets from your research into like this overview. They call themselves a journey management tool. So when it kind of brings the connection of people, processes, and products, and different teams as well. Great tool to use. I know there were a few questions in the Q&A. We'll be shortly moving, and one of them was about the journey mapping. We'll answer it if you stay with us. And another tool is Airtable. It's a great tool to collaborate. It's like a collaborative database tool. And the last but not least is Travito. That's another tool which is amazing for working when you work across different projects. You do different research, pieces of research. We write a lot of reports, so it's kind of a library of different projects in one place. However, we are running out of time, so I'll hand on to Amy to quickly talk about the pre-pandemic case study that we have.
No worries. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to take you through a case study where we applied a lot of this thinking. As Mila said, this was pre-pandemic, so we worked with a charitable organisation that manages the running of 6 key heritage sites around London, and they were several years into their digital transformation, and they set out several strategic objectives, but the most important one that they were focusing on was increasing the number of online and on-site visitors from 4 million to 40 million. And to do that, they wanted to adopt an audience-first approach, and they were looking at particular things that they could implement around programs for families and young children, attracting UK audiences outside of London, because as I say, all their sites were based in London, and then also embracing digital and updating both the on-site, so the physical location, and the online experiences as well. So we worked with them in quite a large program of work across several different streams, utilising a number of the different service design tools that we've talked about today to help them to move those experiences forward. So everything that you can see on screen here, stakeholder interviews, user research. We created a set of personas for them off the back of the research that we did, and journey maps. You can see an example of that. It's quite small on here, but you can see that at the bottom right. And then we also conducted a lot of field-based research for them. So one of the digital tools that they wanted to upgrade was a digital visitor guide. So we actually worked with them. They had a prototype of that we tested in the live environment, so that we could see things like how the sun glaring on the screen was impacting people's use of that in that setting, and how having their small children with them was causing people difficulties in trying to navigate between the digital visitor guide and then also the physical signage in the location as well. We also did a virtual reality expert mystery shop. So we've got some glasses that we can wear that are mobile eye trackers, and it enabled one of our consultants to be able to record a walkthrough of their journey through the site in this physical location, and it tracked where their eyes were looking, what their eyes were drawn to, what they could see easily or not. And it also, we could record a voiceover sort of analysing that experience as we went along. So lots of different types of research, lots of different types of modelling and workshops that we went through to get to the point of being able to develop some outcomes for them around producing those improved digital and physical experiences. So that was IA for the website, was just one of the things that we did, and wireframes that we tested for the new site as well. So lots of different outcomes and lots of different ways that we engaged with them. And you might think, oh, that's quite a large programme of work. This was a large programme of work. This organisation were already on quite a way with their journey to digital transformation and some way forward in their maturity internally as well. But sometimes a lot of the work that we do is coming alongside organisations who have yet to take that first step. So today we've tried to sort of show you a range of things, a range of tools that you can kind of apply as a first step, but also for those of you who are maybe a little bit further into that journey, ways that you can kind of start to build on some of those things. And whether that is a kind of a first workshop to map out the current state of a service post-COVID, and kind of work out where to go next in terms of research and iteration, that's something we can help with. Or if you're further along that journey and you're needing some support to start building in some of those additional layers, then we can help with that too. But we're just going to wrap up now because we realise we're just out of time, and then we'll take a few minutes just to answer some of your questions that have come through on the Q&A.
So, yes, we've covered quite a lot, discussed quite a lot of tools. And I think what we want to leave you with is reflections. A lot has changed in the past few years during the pandemic, post-pandemic. So it's time to take stock of where you are at your organization and the services that you provide. So what is happening? What do you need to keep? What do you need to iterate? What do you need to remove? What is your first step in mapping the current state of service? How you can utilize the tools such as blueprints, stakeholder maps, user journey maps, ecosystem map, value proposition canvases to help you. How can you iterate and improve and ensure rapidly made changes to provide ongoing value for you as a business and for your users? And what tools are you going to use to support your service design projects? Which digital tools would you want to play with and experiment with? Just as a wrap up, we wanted to mention that at Bunnyfoot we have a range of different training programs, and service design is one of those. And this is the course line that we cover in our service design course. The next one is happening on the 6th of December. And we also do customized service training in offline and online these days, and hybrid versions as well. So we can do that too. And we can also do a service design project with you. If you have any queries, please get in touch with Joe Hutton, who is our lovely person behind the webinars. Thanks, Joe. And yes, we have time for a few questions. We can see the questions in the Q&A. So for those who are still with us, and there is a question about the key differences between the customer experience management and service design. So the big difference is the customer experience management. I don't work in that field, but I assume there's a lot of focus on the customer. The service design focuses on the staff as well. This is a huge difference. So you not only do your research, everything to please your customer, you also do the research of what is happening with your staff. Is the staff happy? Is there some protocols, is some tools, some systems, some, I don't know, equipment is missing to make sure that the staff is happy and can deliver the service in the way it intended? So there's always looking at the customer and looking at the staff on the levels as we described, for example, on stage or off stage. Do you have anything to add, Amy, to that question?
There's a related question, which is around considering service design and UX design teams. How do those teams integrate? How should we work together, and who should be responsible for what? In my experience, that varies quite a bit from organisation to organisation. It will depend on the size of your organisation and who you've got within those teams. As we mentioned right at the start, sometimes you've got individual teams who are responsible for sort of individual product areas or individual parts of the experience overall. So thinking about how you would, you'd work together across those, it's going to look different from place to place. At a very high level, your service designers are trying to look more holistically and encourage that kind of holistic thinking. And a UX level, they're going to be focusing on more specific experiences as part of that journey. But you would definitely want there to be cross-pollination, cross-working between those different teams. Somebody wanted to see the book recommendations again, so I'll just pop that slide up. So you've got those.
Thank you. there was also the question, I think, related to service blueprint. What is under the physical evidence? So usually it's different types of artifacts. And what we mean by artifacts, it could be digital or physical artifacts. For example, if it's receipt after you bought something, so you have a physical receipt, that's the artifact, that's the evidence of physical evidence of the service. Or, for example, it could be receiving an email or receiving an answer from the customer service, or it could be tangible and intangible. It's something that your customer, your user is interacting with throughout the service. So this is called artifacts of physical evidence, which sometimes is not physical, but it's kind of something that you deal with, interact with.
I've got a question here that's, once you've completed the blueprint, how do you prioritize what you're going to tackle and work on? So as Mila said at the beginning, we would create an as-is blueprint first of all. So we try and map out what is the current state of things. And from that, you would be able to spot where there are gaps in your knowledge, where there are things that you need to go away and do some more research on. So that would help you to prioritize your next steps from that stage. And then once you've got your research, you would start to sort of build on your as-is blueprint so that you can make sure that's an accurate reflection of what's actually happening. And then from there, you would start to think about how are there opportunities within this to change it. So you can begin to look at the pain points in that journey from both the end user and the behind the scenes perspective. You can see where there's maybe duplication of effort happening, where things could be streamlined. You can kind of make things a bit smoother from that perspective. So that process of, first of all, mapping what you've got at the moment, identifying your gaps, and then going from there will help you to prioritize what you do next.
Yeah, thank you. And I can see that somebody is asking where to find more about the service design course. We can place the link maybe in the chat. Maybe one of my colleagues will send the link in the chat, but it's also on our website. We have the overview of all the courses, and there is a fundamentals of service design course when we kind of go into all the details and cover the most interesting tools or the most common tools in service design. As I mentioned, service design borrowed a lot of things, but then it improved a lot of those tools and methodologies, and to make it collaborative, visual, interactive, iterative, like following all the main principles of service design. We have the last but the least question. What is an example of value exchange evolving backend system? Well, again, it depends on the level, how you're creating the ecosystem map or value exchange map. Oh, sorry, in this case, ecosystem map. So it could be, when we talk, for example, about IT, so it could be a very specific service or IT platform that you're using, CRM or you name it. And usually it's the content data exchange or information exchange. It could be as specific as complaints log, sharing the data on the complaints received from for your online service, or maybe and there is a data insights if you're collecting feedback. So it can be something, could be general, but then it could be also something quite precise. And depending on the teams working using that system, that would be the teams interacting and showing, again, as I said, it could be showing how overview of what is working, but you can also show the things which are not working and what you need to review and make sure that this exchange is happening and there is no maybe some teams are not involved and not connected to that particular, I don't know, system or platform, don't have access. And this is where you need to introduce it and tackle it. I think we've covered all. Sorry, if you have any addition, Amy?
No, I think that is all the questions. So all that remains is to say thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Apologies that we've gone slightly over, but we've really enjoyed getting to speak to you today and getting to answer some of your questions. And yeah, if you would like a recording of this session, then please do get in contact with Jo afterwards and she'll sort that out for you. But I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.